Wow, pin drop silence. So I think we need to get the show on the road, right? Ooh. Hey, a little weak there. Welcome to the Fletcher Ideas Exchange 4 with the theme of Migration in 2030. My name is Mihir Mankad. I teach the public speaking courses here, and I've been honored now to lead what is now the 11th public speaking event here. Over the past couple of weeks, I'll tell you, just working on this, it's been a real treat for me. Because I'm a bit of an accidental academic. I found a service school, I thought, by accident, but I don't think it was an accident, because this is as close to my calling as I've felt. And the people that I've had the chance to work with over the last few days are truly wonderful individuals who have dedicated their lives to serving the underserved, serving migrants, to refugees, people seeking asylum, and they've come here. Some have driven for hours just to have about 8 minutes with you. Now, in this cast, we have 3 faculty members. We have 4 global experts in the field. We have 2 students and an alum. Let me tell you about one fallacy. If you think that faculty members who have spoken their entire lives to groups are not nervous about the situation, you are wrong. Look, public speaking is the biggest fear in the world, right? It trumps the fear of death, as I've said to a couple of people here in survey after survey. But the audience also doesn't bring the intensity that you think it does. Towards that, let's do a little welcome for our speakers. And let's do it by the wonderful groups that we have here. So our guests joining us from outside. How many guests here from outside Fletcher? Wow, that's quite a number. So welcome. So let us tell you a little bit about the Fletcher School. A lot of degree programs here. The first degree program, the most common one, is the MALD program, Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy, translated into, I can apply for any job that I want. Right? And let's hear from the MALD students. Are you here in the house? Okay. MALD is here for sure. Right? Another degree program, the Masters of International Business, MIB, translated as more money, more problems. Is MIB in the house? Very nice. Per capita, I think you win. We'll come back to the malls at the end, okay? MIB is in the house. We also have some LLMs and some mid-career MA students who are now saying, what, so much money and we're 40% through already? Are the MAs and the LLMs who are here with us for a year in this auditorium? All right, Federico, one more time. LLMs and MAs. There we go. Some energy here. And of course, the PhD students who never want to leave here. I see 1. PhD students in the house? 2, 3. And how about current PhDs and former PhDs? Are you in the house? Former PhDs? Okay, great. Good. And then the MAHA students. MAHA, Masters of Arts in Humanitarian Assistance, translated into, we do the real work, but there's only a couple of us around, right? MAHA's in the house? We have a MAHA alum. And 1 student in this year's class who is going to join us, hopefully, in a bit. So lots of degree programs. Have I missed anyone? Exchange students in the house. Yes? Yeah? See, you volunteered with so much bravery. Now your cheer has to match your volunteerism, all right? Is the exchange student in the house? We'll take it. We got a show to run, all right? And since I promised the last time, okay, let's add all of them. Is Fletcher in the house? Excellent. And a very warm welcome to our guests. Let's get the show on the road. This is the Fletcher Ideas Exchange. This is the 4th one. It involves faculty, student, guests, and alums. But in 2015, running the public speaking course that I was privileged to teach here, sometimes you'd hear a speech that you feel it needs to be recreated for a larger audience. With that goal in mind, we created a program called The Faces of Our Community, which were 4-minute speeches by students recreated in this environment. And when that went well, we thought, let's open this up and create our own TED-style event. The history is that the TEDx license had gone to the college, so we can't call it TEDx here, but we can run it with the same sensibilities, and we don't have to show the TED videos that generally come with the event. So this is our, we've done 4 FIEs. This is the current one. This is the last one was also sponsored by the Leir Institute around human security primarily, but bridging the academic policy gap. And this is the one right prior to that. And really, as I touched on before today, we're going to have not just speakers, right? Not people who have asked and volunteered and want to hear their own voices, but people who have really committed themselves to a worthy cause at a special place that is the Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And look, they are going to be a little nervous. Everyone gets nervous in this setting, right? It is, I said, the #1 fear. But as an audience, we can bring them along. So right before you start, just for the speakers, the best shout out that we have had to right now. Let's get the show on the road and a cheer for the speakers. Coming up. Now, speakers, the audience will not bring an intensity, but for the listeners today, right? The art of communication is incomplete without the art of listening. I'm going to give you a challenge. You're going to hear speeches, 9 of them, 9 minutes or less, average about 8 minutes. Right? In this time, I want you to challenge yourself and listen in a way that if you were to meet someone outside, and they say, what did Dr. Burgess talk about? You're able to piece that together in 4, 5, 6 sentences. 9 minutes, maybe 1,200 words that you can piece together in a few sentences. And if you really push yourself to say at the end of it, what was the main message? And what am I getting out of this? You will enjoy this process. More time will slow down for you, and you'll see the beauty of the experience that this group has to bring. So a check-in on that. We won't have time for questions after every speaker, but at the halfway point and the very end, we'll give you some time to ask questions to any specific speaker. And again, if we're not having fun, we're probably not doing it right. Now, towards your fun, there will be food and drink. The fun drinks will be after the event, right? But at the halfway point, we will also have some snacks. Right now, with this point there, let me just show 3 slides, 3 important terms. Migrant. The movement, migration, the movement of people to a new area or country in order to find work or better living conditions. 4 out of every 100 people in the world are migrants. Forced migration. Just a definition as we get into our talks. About 10% of all migrants are in this category. And the definition of a refugee by the UNHCR, the United Nations Agency for Refugees. With that background, we're ready to welcome our first speaker, who is someone I deeply admire, despite him making the mistake of hiring me a few years ago. Dean Ian Johnstone is literally one of the most wonderful people I have ever met. And you know, there's no bribery going in my saying this here. And I met him as an academic dean, the amount of time and consideration that he has for people around him, and also deep thought to really push you along the needle in wherever you want to go is really something that's not just a gift, but something he has worked towards. I'm really delighted that he's the dean ad interim here. Ian, could you please start us off with some remarks?
Thank you, Professor Mankad. Thank you, Mihir. I actually pulled that tie out of my closet this morning, and good thing I didn't put it on, because you would have realized I only have one tie. But this is a great event. This has become a tradition at the Fletcher School. This is the fourth, I guess not quite annual, but the fourth Fletcher Ideas Exchange. It's really something that I hope goes on forever. A lot of credit to Mihir Mankad for both helping us to conceive of this format when we were first trying to imagine what we could do to try to present some of the findings of research that we were doing to the school in an innovative way, and for being such a great impresario and helping to master of ceremonies this event. And to see so many of you here today is really wonderful, because a big part of what makes this work is when you've got a lively and engaged audience. Thank you also to Marina Traviakas, who from the beginning has been doing a lot of the organizational work to pull something like this together. So Marina, thank you. And behind Marina, he probably doesn't want me to say this, but the Carnegie Corporation was actually in some ways the impetus behind this, indirectly, because they funded us to do work on, among other things, bridging the gap between academic research and policymakers. And these talks and the videos that are going to come out of these talks is one way of trying to bridge that gap. So great event. The theme, as you know, is migration. Migration, it's a timely topic. Migration has become a defining element in national politics in this country and in many other countries around the world, and sadly to say, not in a positive way. Most of us have read about the benefits of migration from an economic point of view, from a societal point of view. I've had the chance to feel that, see that, benefit from that firsthand, having spent many years in the city of Toronto. In 2016, BBC Radio determined that Toronto was the most diverse city in the world. Okay? 51% of the population of Toronto was born outside of Canada. Okay? 230 nationalities are represented in Toronto. 180 languages or dialects are spoken in the city of Toronto. And it's a wonderful city. I've loved living there. Almost everybody I know who lives there loves it. Anybody who visits it says it's a wonderful city. But unfortunately, that narrative is not what dominates the discourse in the US today, in Europe, and frankly, not in Canada either. Okay? So a timely topic. We've got a great group of speakers, students, faculty, invited guests, offering in 9 minutes or less their thoughts about this topic in a way which will hopefully make you think differently about it. Okay? The event is meant to be a fun event, but it's also a serious topic, so not everything you hear is going to make you want to cheer. As Professor Mankad said, I actually participated in the first one of these, and I can testify to the fact that it is challenging. It is nerve-wracking. Most of us are used to standing up in front of classrooms for an hour and a half and sort of improvising and doing it very well. It feels different somehow to try to capture in 8 minutes, crystallize your thoughts about a difficult topic. So it's challenging, but it's also a lot of fun, and I think you're in for a real treat. So with that, let me turn it over back to Professor Mankad, who will introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. Let's invite our very first speaker. Professor Karen Jacobsen has been at the Fletcher School for 18 years. She's Henry J. Leir Professor of Global Migration. His focus on forced migration, especially on urbanization and the resilience of migrants. Professor Jacobsen lives in Brookline with her son and 2 dogs named Fluffy and Jake. Right? And today, her topic is the future of migration, urbanization, technology, and inclusivity. Let's please give a warm welcome to Professor Jacobsen.
Thank you so much, Mihir. That was a wonderful introduction, and I see what you mean about being an impresario and getting us all going, and it's totally great to be here, even though I can't see you because of the lights. And like he said, we're all extremely nervous because 8 minutes is impossible for us, but I've told John he just has to give me more time, okay? So, otherwise he's not going to get a grade. So, let's see. So, what I want to talk about today is to set the tone for our topic tonight, which is what migration is going to look like in the future. So I want you to just bear with me as I kind of riff on a few ideas about where I think it's going and what's going to happen in the future, right? So I'm going to shape this around two main themes. The first one is that I think what's going to happen in the future is that migration is going to increase. But it's not going to increase much beyond the level that it's at now, which perhaps you know. If we think about international migration, the definition of an international migrant is someone who's lived in another country for about a year in a country not of their birth. Now, I often ask my class to guess how many international migrants there are in the world today. So I won't do that now, but you might think about it, or perhaps you know. And the fact of the matter is, there are, as of last year, according to the UN, 258 million migrants in the world, international migrants who are living in a country not of their birth, and that includes refugees. But the interesting piece of this is that that number constitutes about 3.3% of the world's population. And what's also interesting is that that percentage is virtually the same. It's a little bit higher. Back in 1960, it was 2.6% of the world's population. So the percentage, the proportion of the world's population who are migrating across borders is not really changing that much. It means that 97% of the world is not moving across borders. They're staying home. Okay, but we are going to see an absolute number increase because the world's population is increasing. So we will see more migrants. And the second theme that I want to talk about is that where I think it's all happening and where I think migration is going to happen even more is it's going to be a matter of urbanization. Migrants today are moving into cities. So that's what I want to talk about today. So this increasing migration, like I said, the absolute number is increasing. The proportion is kind of increasing a little bit, not really, but it means that it's increasing. So why is it increasing? So we could think about the forces, the enablers of migration. And I think there are a couple of them. One of the most important enablers is that migration happens in the context of networks. If you have a family or some kind of connection in another country, that network connection will enable you both to move in the first place and to settle into your destination area much more successfully. They'll help you find a job, they'll help you find housing, help you find access to services, and so forth. And so networks are very important in enabling migration. And because the number of migrants is increasing, the networks are increasing and strengthening. And so that is a potent force in enabling migration in the future. So that's the one enabler, the thing pushing migration. The other thing is technology, and particularly communications technology. Smartphones, an iPhone was invented, in 2007, or came into existence in 2007. That's just, 10 or 11 years ago. But smartphones have really transformed the way that migration happens. If you have a smartphone, it will help you figure out your route. It will help you access a smuggler. It will help you transfer money, either send money or receive money. It will help you migrate. And it will help all of your others migrate too. And as this communications technology becomes more sophisticated, it is going to act in the interests of migrants. So these are two very potent forces that are going to push migration. Now, of course, there are also forces acting to inhibit and prevent migration, and we're very familiar with them. One is that governments in destination countries don't want migrants. And so they are hardening their borders. Securitizing is the term we use, increasing the security and the inability of people to cross borders by building walls and fences and minefields and berms and whatever you want to try to prevent people from crossing. That's one force against it. And the second, of course, is the political force in the form of populist politicians who fearmonger amongst us, the public, using migrants and refugees as a way to promote their message of fear and threat from migrants. Now, my view that these two forces are acting against migration will not be enough to counter the forces that will enable it. Okay, so I think there's going to be increasing migration. Where is it all happening? Like I said, we live in an urbanizing world. So back in 2005, that blue line at the bottom is the urban population of the world. It crossed over, and now we are in ever-increasing numbers of people. The proportion of people living in urban settings is predicted by the UN to be about 68% by 2030. Today, it's about 55%. So people are moving into cities, and it doesn't matter whether you're moving across borders or the even larger number of people who are internal migrants who are moving within their own countries and are moving from their rural areas to the cities in their own countries. So one of the implications of this, sorry, this is so small, but what these two slides are showing is back in 1970, this is showing the growth rate of cities. But what I particularly want to draw your attention to is the rise of megacities. Megacities are cities with populations of more than 10 million people. Today, there are 33 megacities in the world. And it's predicted that by 2030, there will be 43 megacities in the world. And most of those new cities will be in developing countries. So we're looking at an urbanization that is very much focused around primary cities. That's often the capitals of countries, but also secondary cities, second cities of countries. And so that's a big shift that's happening, right? So what are some of the implications of all this? Okay, let's think about the implications of urbanization and increased migration. Let's look at it first on the national level. Nationally, what does it mean that people are moving into cities? Well, one possibility, and I find this very interesting to think about, especially from an environmental point of view, is if people are moving into the cities, they're leaving the countryside. Does that mean we're going to see rural depopulation in countries? Are people going to vacate those little villages and towns? And what would that mean for environmentally? If we don't have sprawl in those, if they don't have growth in the little towns, if all the growth is happening in the main towns, what could that mean? But also, what does it mean socially? Does it mean that we will see increasing rural impoverization as the rural areas become drained of young people, of brain power, and so forth? So that's a big issue we need to think about. What does it mean for cities? Many things. Many of you, I'm sure, have spent time in the cities of the South, particularly the large cities of the South. And it doesn't even have to be the cities of the South to know what problems traffic congestion alone can cause, how much time it wastes, what kinds of pollution problems it creates, how it slows down everything, how it inhibits access to services, how it creates problems for everyone across the board, not just poor people, but rich people too. We see loss of green space. In cities that you travel in, you see fewer and fewer parks, areas of green space, trees, as the ever-burgeoning concrete jungle takes over the city. There are many other implications of this. One is when people come into these areas, migrants and refugees, you're kidding. They are, John's just messing with me now, right, John? Okay, so we're seeing many problems. Okay, I'm going to skim right along. Okay, just a few little ideas about how it's going to look in the future. what could we imagine the future to look like? We could imagine gated cities, right? We could imagine places where cities are divided. We could imagine more camps in cities. There are already cities with refugee camps in the middle of them. We could imagine walled cities. And if anybody knows what this city is, tell me afterwards, and I'll give you a prize. We can, how technology transform cities? We can imagine, and there is really interesting work out there, futuristic studies about how cities will happen, vertical cities that are taking place at many different levels, leaving the area around the city open for green space and agricultural areas. Urban agriculture. We can think of many ways in which technology will transform cities in order to enable it to absorb migrants. But I want to leave you with this thought, which is, the most important thing that we have to consider for the future is not what will happen to cities in terms of the technology and so forth, but what will happen to the migrants and refugees who will be in these cities, who are still facing the same discrimination, the same political problems, the same lack of access to services, the same poverty, the same lack of rights that they do today. And that's going to be the biggest area where we need your ideas to help us think how we're going to address this. Thank you.
Yeah, let's. Katrina, we lost the clicker. Oh. Okay, so we found the clicker, and as a child growing up, my mother used to call me absent-minded professor, never knowing that the second part may come true too. So fortunately, we found it again. We talked about the art of listening just to get going. Kind bars for a few people. Who can tell me first, easy question, how many migrants are there in the world today, in 2018? 240 million. 250 in 2018? Oh, we actually have heard a number for 2017. What was that number? 70 million. Yes. Nope. Total migrants are, Devang? Nope. Someone said 258? Who said that? Okay, I believe you. Here we go. And who else said 258 million? Okay, I believe you. And who else said 258 million? Okay, all right. Really? Okay, I believe you too. One more bonus question. A little earlier we introduced. Oops, did I injure someone? No. Introduced Professor Jacobsen earlier. The names of her two dogs are, yes, Anna? Fluffy and Jake. No, that doesn't count. Fluffy and Jake, right? And this is the aunt. And Kim, okay. So Anna, yes, you deserve this kind bar. And Graeme Rodgers joined us from New York, works for what agency? IRC stands for? International Rescue Committee. Okay, this was an easy one. Right, and how many years has Professor Jacobsen been at Fletcher School? Okay, that's too many to give right now, but come to me after the event and we'll go with the free food that will be there for you. Thank you for coming back. Exciting event. We have 4 more speakers for tonight. Joining us from Clark University is Dr. Anita Fabos. Right? Dr. Fabos is herself also a daughter of migrants, and Dr. Fabos is an anthropologist in amongst a majority of political scientists and academics here. Dr. Fabos has an interesting talk today on identity, given her own experience. She's a world-renowned expert on the field who has focused on migration in Egypt amongst the Sudanese. And here she is to start off our second half on migration, movement, and identity. Okay.
Thank you so much. was the absent-minded professor, so we're going to have to duke that out. In the year 2000, I was living in Cairo, and I had joined the American University there, the American University in Cairo. I lived with my husband and our young daughter, and one day I was sitting in the beautiful courtyard of the Greek campus. There I was, enjoying a cup of tea with my colleague Samia. We were engaged in the usual small talk between colleagues, and she had described to me her return to Egypt after living in the United States for maybe 10 years. And she asked me a question, which was, where do I think that I was going to raise my daughter? She had described coming back to Egypt as an important place for her children to find their roots. And the question, I have to say, really took me by shock. Was my daughter going to be raised in Egypt, or was she going to be raised in the United States? And the reason I found this question so troubling was that I myself was uncomfortable or not really very connected with this idea of my own roots. You see, my parents were from, my father was a refugee from Hungary, and my mother was an au pair from Switzerland, and she had plans to go back to Switzerland, ended up staying in the United States, and so there I was, an awkward mashup kid with no home language to speak of, no real unifying traditions like we often hear about with migrant families going back home and feeling like they have some kind of connection and identity to their home family. So this question of not really fitting into this binary of here and away, or home country or migrant country, I felt that question of straddling that boundary really set me up for a world of awkward questions over the course of my career in forced migration and refugee studies. Because, as you know, the paradigm for forced migration and refugee studies and the whole way that we think about migration is that people come from home countries, and they come from home countries, they migrate, and then maybe they return to their home countries, or they don't. They fit into a new country. These policies of home and away are really an expression of our predisposition, or our current organization, our current political organization, into settled communities. And these settled communities often use migration policy to manage the flow of people. So the policies are not made by the movers, they're made by the settled people. And I think we can recognize that I think we had some earlier speakers that were really talking about how that paradigm puts migrants in an awkward position, because if you can't go back, if you can't fit in, where are you? You're in between, you're out of place. And this paradigm has been more and more challenged by the sheer number of migrants who are living and working and traveling and moving, and not just through one country, but through many countries. Now, so from the point of view of migrants themselves, you see that migrant belonging doesn't necessarily dispose of the identities that people had from their previous lives. And as we see now, more and more migrants are moving not just from one place to another place, but across geographic space. Many forced migrants, for example, will transit in another country, or not think that they're moving, but then have to be displaced again. So there's a lot of connections that migrants and forced refugees make between the different places that they've lived, the places where they have family, the places where they have connections. And so they're really not straddling this binary the way that I think the migration policy expects them to straddle it. They're not fitting in this specific way. So an alternative to thinking about this, it could be explored by giving you two stories of people that I know, one a Sudanese migrant and the other a Hungarian national. Or are they? Are their stories really that simple, or can we find some complexity in their backgrounds? So the first person I'd like to introduce to you is a person with whom I've done a bit of writing and research. Her name is Elsara, and we've worked on the idea of identity in the Sudanese diaspora. So you could say that she's a typical migrant in certain ways. But if you go a little bit further, first of all, she's a band leader of her own musical group called Elsara and the Nubatones, and she's a real badass. I really recommend that you go and listen to her sometime. But through her music, she explores other kinds of heritages that really make the idea of her as a Sudanese migrant more complicated. Her family has long-time roots in Nubia. Her grandmother is from Egypt. She has connections to Sudan for political national pride, and she lives in the United States and specifically in Brooklyn. So these identities really complicate the idea that she has a place to go to that's home and a place that she's come to that she's fitting in. She has connections to all of these different places. But let me introduce you to the second woman in my story. She's called Mariska, and she's a proud Hungarian woman who, even though she did attend graduate school in the United States, she made a conscious choice, like my friend Samia, to return to her national homeland, Hungary, to raise her children so that they would be Hungarian. And you know, on the surface, again, it looks like her identity is relatively straightforward. But if you go back just a couple generations, you find out that her 4 grandparents all represent communities in Hungary that have been erased or absorbed by the nation state over the past 60 or 80 years. And in that case, she does have a connection to people from other places that is masked by her national identity. So this alternative to the binary of belonging that is proclaimed by the nation-state system and our migration policy really makes us think that the heritage of movers is really important, right? But so is the movement in our heritage. And if we could somehow find a connection between those two ideas, if we as people could start connecting our web of belonging to places and people and significant parts of the world that make sense to us, I think it could really shape the way that we thought about belonging in 2030 and beyond. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anita, and also with a soundbite for us, right? The movement of heritage is also important for us. Now, Anita, you drove all the way for about 3 hours to get here, and along with you also came your wonderful, is your husband here too? So where are you, sir? Right here. Please, a little round of applause for Philippe, who has joined us all the way here at the Fletcher School. Philippe, your first impressions of the school?
Fantastic place.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Philippe. Right, moving on to another anthropologist. Dr. Alfred Babo came to the United States from the Ivory Coast as a refugee himself. Right? A number of countries along the way, and then arrived in Northampton here in New England, and as a scholar at Smith College. He now continues to teach in this area, and today he's going to share his thoughts on a very important issue, which is the African youth tragedy in the Mediterranean. Alfred, thank you for joining us. Please, thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to start this talk with an image. In April 2015, a list of 17,000 migrants, mostly African, dead in the Mediterranean was deployed in the European Parliament to draw the attention of the world on this tragedy. But how to explain the ongoing drama? I believe that if we can understand today's migration, then we can try to imagine how it might look like in 2030. As we talk about migration, remember the original migration. Paleontologists taught us that thousands of years ago, humankind walked from Africa to populate the rest of the world. This scientific truth was possible because human ancestors enjoyed freedom. And at that time, what was important, that there were no frontier, no immigration policies. But unlike those times, today, migrants face closure of borders, restrictive policies, fences, walls, and even death in the Mediterranean. What is important to understand as we talk about migration is why, for Africans, despite those challenges, why are they leaving their continent? I would like to emphasize two factors that are not always being combined and explored together. The first one is an economic factor, an economic system which creates more unemployment and structural poverty in some African countries. As I talk tonight, 160 million Africans from 14 Francophone countries are using a currency created in 1945 by France. So during the colonial period, they are still using this currency today. You may wonder what a currency has to do with the illegal immigration. I will make it straight and simple. For 70 years, each African country using this currency has to deposit 50% of its national wealth in the Bank of France. Even today. They have been doing that at the expense of national economic investments in agriculture, in industry, in technology that would have created jobs for the youth of these countries. Hit by poverty and unemployment, of course, the youth, the great majority of these youth, takes the deadly journey toward Europe. The second factor is the deficit of democracy and its subsequent wars. When I ended up at Smith College in 2012 as a refugee scholar, I have never imagined that a simple election in my country, in Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire, would have thrown me in the forest with my family, trying to find a safe place from Ghana to Togo, and then find a safe place in Northampton, Massachusetts. Like me, thousands of young men and young women, victims of violence and civil wars, like in DRC, in northern Mali, in South Sudan, are those refugees who are trying to leave the continent and who are trying to cross the Mediterranean. That being said, how can we imagine African migration in 2030? The truth is that from the original migration, the first journey, up to now, African migration has never stopped. Not even wars will ever stop it. Because Africans, this current generation, future generation, will continue to dream and look for a new and better life in Africa, but also elsewhere. But most important is that Africans, as the first human being, enjoy and believe in freedom of mobility. This freedom of mobility leads them to look for new roads, new destinations, like China, for example. Look, 50 years ago, there were barely African populations settled in China. Today, we can talk about Little Africa in China. One of the well-known is in Guangzhou. This trend to look for new roads and new destinations will grow toward 2030. It will even change the way we think about economic migration, because those Africans who are going or who will continue to go in China, they are not going there to look for shelters. They are going there to do business. Another important change that we are seeing on the continent is that 15 West African nations, Anglophone, Francophone, are getting together to create a single regional currency. This currency will make a huge change, a huge difference, because not only it will stop and end the exploitative economic system of the franc CFA, but it will generate more jobs, since some African countries will not be putting their money in France. They will be putting their money in the economic sector and create more jobs. If, in addition, Africans can promote peace and democracy, then they will reverse the flows of illegal immigrants toward Europe. But not only African leaders, but also policymakers in this modern world, in Europe, together, if we can push these new changes that we are seeing in Africa with peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea, for example, and elections that were delayed for many times in DRC, for example, if we can push this kind of change that promotes democracy and peace, then we can make African migration a social and safe migration, instead of the deadly journey that we are experiencing now. Thank you.
Alfred Babo, all the way from Fairfield University in Connecticut, who has driven all the way here to speak to us. Alfred, thank you for that insight too on sometimes something like the usage of a currency and the ripple effect it has on the issue of dangerous migration. From Alfred, we go on to someone else who has been with Fletcher for a while and someone that I've had the pleasure to get to know. Professor Kim Wilson is also focused on the journey of migrants in many parts of the world. In fact, she has spearheaded a program here at the Fletcher School where we get typically about 18 heads of financial inclusion typically from African nations who come here for a residency program. And we get an opportunity to interact, work with them, and sort of catalyze their journey in terms of policy. Now, Kim Wilson is teaching international business and human security at the Fletcher School. And her work is also around the resilience and the financial journey of migrants. In today's talk, she's going to take us through a journey through this exciting story that she will share with us entitled Migration and the Minority Report. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you. How many of you here have seen the Minority Report? Do you know what it is? Okay, it's a movie, and it's about a dystopian future. So I will touch on that. So let me start. Oops. So please meet Princess. But before you meet Princess, let me tell you how I met Princess. I was in Costa Rica with 8 Fletcher students. If any of you are here, please raise your hands. Excellent. And we went and documented 71 Odyssean stories just like Princess's. People coming from South Asia, East Africa, West Africa, through Brazil and Peru, northbound to the United States. So why did Princess leave Cameroon? That's where she's from. Well, she had a good reason to. Cameroon is dominated by a Francophone regime, and she is Anglophone. She is the minority that we're talking about here. And she was targeted as an activist for violence. She felt she had no recourse but to abandon her mother and her 2 children and flee with hopes of rejoining them at some point in the future. So let's just imagine, it's a black screen here. Let's imagine her journey from Cameroon until where we met her in Costa Rica. It went something like this. Cameroon to Lagos by bus. She convinces a pastor to buy her plane ticket to Sao Paulo. In Sao Paulo, she works odd jobs. She meets some Senegalese men. They agree to travel north by bus. They go to Rio Branco. They go to Lima. They go to Quito. They go to Medellin. She gets turned back at Medellin because she doesn't have the money to pay the police bribe. She goes back to Quito. She regroups. She borrows money and gets a gift from a friend, enough to buy just 1 bus ticket. She moves north. She makes it through Medellin. She gets to Capurganá, which is at the very edge of the Darien Gap. So let's see what her journey looks like on a map. Something like this, right? And it is not atypical of people like her moving towards the US. Why? Because she can get a visa in Brazil, and you can also get a visa in Ecuador. So this is a common route. So there she is, and she's at the edge of the Darien Gap. So let me describe this. The Darien Gap is 10,000 square miles, about the size of Massachusetts and another half of Massachusetts. And it's jungle that divides North and South America. In fact, no road can go there. The Pan-American highway that goes from Alaska to the tip of Chile cannot pass through the Darien Gap. It's the only place that engineers cannot cut through. It is made of mile-high mountains, fierce jungles, ferocious animals, poisonous plants, raging rivers, and armed bandits and thugs and paramilitary, collectively called by the migrants that traverse this jungle, the mafia. So Princess gets to the edge of this jungle, and she finds a companion, a Cameroonian that she calls the Prof. And he says, I'll guide you through the jungle. Oh, did I mention that Princess is blind? That entire journey I just told you, she's blind. She can't see more than 20 feet in front of herself. She has glaucoma. So he says, I will escort you through the jungle. They begin their journey. A day and a half into the journey, they stumble across a woman, and she has a broken leg. And the Prof says to Princess, I can't take you any further. I have to carry this woman back. I can't live with myself. And she's terrified. And he says, don't worry, I'll hail down a group of people you can travel with. And he finds 4 West African men that she can travel with. And it takes them just about an hour or so before these men find that she's blind, she can't see, and she's slowing them down. And they're furious. They chide her, scoff at her, scold her. And at one point, crossing a river, they're making a human chain. And what do? Try to shake her loose from the human chain. She's a drag on them. Yet she clings to them. She emerges out of the jungle 8 days later. And she finds a woman who's willing to give her $40 worth of money so that she can buy a phone. Why? Because everything was stolen from them in the jungle. And she didn't have much to begin with. So here she is in La Cruz, where we met her, the Fletcher team and myself. And she emerges from a shop, and she is wearing a tank top, flashy shorts, spiffy new sneakers. And she feels like $1 million. And I said, Princess, you really look 100% American. And she gives me a giant hug, and she says, really, 100% American? And I say, yes, 100% American. And that's the last we see of her. She does text us. She texts us in Tapachula, Mexico, saying that she had been spirited out by a smuggler 2 days later and around Nicaragua, which has sealed its borders. So she takes this tremendous boat ride into Honduras, out of Honduras, into Guatemala, from Guatemala to Mexico. And that is the last we've heard of Princess. But we suspect she's doing fine. So what does Princess's journey look like in 2030? And that was the question that was posed to us. Well, to answer that question, I have to take you to another country. Here we are in China. Now, China has a tremendous surveillance system, right? So here's just an example of it. Cameras everywhere, and the country, the government, is rolling out a very interesting plan that's going to have countrywide coverage by 2020. That's not 2030, that's 2020. And this plan involves surveillance, but so specific that there's facial recognition, that specific people can be identified. This data will be merged and is being merged with data from Ant Financial, from Sesame Credit, from Alibaba, and all of the other commercial structures there. And it's being combined in such a way as to create, and there's 4 cities doing this right now, 2018, a social credit score. So this is a government algorithm that determines your social credit score. All right, so, and it's going to be rolled out by 2020. And what happens with the social credit score? Well, if you're seen to be jaywalking, it goes down. If you're seen to be buying too many video games, it goes down. If you're smoking on trains, it goes down. This is happening right now. And if you owe money, your face goes up on an electronic billboard. If you go through a traffic light, depending on the town, your face, your image goes up on a billboard. You're identified and you're seen. What does this have to do with Princess? Right? We're talking about what's happening in China. Well, Cameroon, which is where Princess is from, has signed a bunch of deals with China. And they have, 2017, bought a ton of surveillance equipment. So remember what's going on in Cameroon now, right? We have the Francophone regime buying equipment to spy on the Anglophones, the minority. Well, who else is in Cameroon? The Chinese are out with it. They're saying, this is what we're doing. We have a national program for social credit scoring and surveillance. The United States is much more surreptitious. We're there as well. We're also in Cameroon. And you can see that we're saying it's because of Boko Haram, but it's really a staging ground for surveillance. We're just not as upfront about it. And as you know, we have the capability in the US to do a lot of surveillance. And it doesn't look very different from what's going on in China. So now let's reimagine Princess's journey. It's 2030. And she has to move from Cameroon, right? She never bothered to do this in 2018, but it's 2030. And the US has an administration, like the Chinese, that doesn't like disloyalty. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so now let's imagine her journey. Close your eyes a moment. She's in Cameroon, and she's trying to get out. But it's impossible to get out because she's identified, and she's tagged as a very important person. She can work in the gold mines. The Anglophone can work in the gold mines. The Francophones don't want to. So she's valuable. They want her there. They don't want her to leave. They want to keep an eye on her. And let's say she does get out and she makes it to Lagos. Maybe she could make it to Brazil, maybe Peru and Colombia, but surely she'd be stopped in Panama, heavily funded by the United States. And there would be cameras there, right? Or if not there, at the southern border of Mexico. And if not there, at the border of the United States. We are going to know all about Princess in 2030. And likely, we're going to return her because we need a presence in Cameroon, and we have cut a deal with them. So she's back in Cameroon no matter what, and she thinks surveillance is a bad idea. That's the point. Surveillance is a bad idea. She's tired of the arms race. She has no choice. She has nowhere to go and no chance to appear or to feel or be 100% American. What is the solution? If you're American tomorrow, please vote. And if you're not American and you're in this room, please encourage every person of voting age tomorrow to do so. That's the hope we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. This really is imagining the possibilities, right? Surveillance and how it could impact migration in 2030. Thank you, Kim. And with your spirit of keeping your love for the underserved, I'm glad you gave love to this side of the room that tends to be underserved. And I don't know if it was Katrina or this group here. From Kim Wilson, we go on to our last speaker of the night, who happens to be a student. Maria Teresa Nagel, where are you? There you are. Okay. Maria is a Malt student, a second year, who is absolutely passionate about this topic. I've had an opportunity to get to know her in the class that I teach this semester, and we had a guest one day who watched her speech, and the guest said, wow, I've rarely seen someone with as much presence and patience as Maria. Now, we've had a good mix here, right? Perhaps some dark calls for the future, but how about we end with a hope and something specific and something positive that Maria has seen firsthand. As a closer for tonight and as a student to follow so many luminaries, let's please welcome our very own Maria Teresa Nagel. Thank you.
It's quite terrifying to go after such an amazing panel of speakers, but I'll definitely try to do my best. So, this is Costa Rica. If you or anyone you know has ever been to Costa Rica, you've likely gone on a tour and seen those cute little colorful frogs that are, by the way, poisonous. And perhaps you've gone on zip lining and taken a canopy tour of the rainforest. Maybe you caught a glimpse of capuchin monkeys. And if you were really lucky, maybe you saw those cute sloths. And, well, I'm from Costa Rica. And as a Costa Rican, I learned firsthand what the positive power of migration can be. And so today, I want to take you on a different kind of journey of Costa Rica. One where we can explore what the challenges are that Costa Rica is facing with regards to forced migration specifically, and how we can turn these challenges into opportunities. So Costa Rica is a country that is perhaps one of the most stable, if not the most stable, in the region, both politically and economically. This has meant that many migrants that are seeking better working opportunities go to Costa Rica. That is the case of Nicaraguan and Panamanian seasonal labor migrants who pick our coffee for the world to enjoy. But it's also the case of Colombian migrants who are fleeing the FARC and the violence that has plagued Colombia for so long, like my stepmother, a phenomenal plastic surgeon. Costa Rica has a population of nearly 5 million people. And according to the United Nations, 9% of that is made up of immigrants. So needless to say, Costa Rica is not a stranger to immigration in the least. But in the last few years, Costa Rica has been seeing a very high influx of immigration into the country. More specifically, of immigrants seeking asylum. And so between 2013 and 2017, you see an increase of 700% in asylum seeking requests. And something perhaps a little more daunting, this year alone, between June and September, Costa Rica received 23,000 requests for asylum from Nicaragua alone. So that would be an additional 400% on top of that one last number, 6,000. Needless to say, this has really challenged Costa Rica's current economic and social policies, especially when you think that only 6% of that actually, 6% of these people that requested asylum actually received refugee status. Now, why is this? Well, in current international law and the frameworks that guide it, there are only two types of migrants. You have refugees, and then you have everybody else. And refugees make up 10% of the 258 million migrants currently in the world. They are protected by the 1951 Refugee Convention, which says that they have to meet a very narrow criteria that was set forth back in 1951 at a time when countries could only fathom that war and government persecution would be the factors that would create forced migration. The organization that protects these migrants, UNHCR, is an organization that is very well funded. Now, let's move over to the other 90%. This other 90% of migrants are unfortunately just thought of as economic migrants. People think they had a choice to leave their country. And the organization that protects them, the IOM, not as heavily funded as UNHCR. Now, leaving aside the discrepancy in funding, perhaps a more alarming issue is that fact that they are thought of as economic migrants and that they had a choice, that they could have very well stayed home, when in fact, most of these migrants are also forced migrants. The only difference is they didn't meet that narrow criteria that was set 70 years ago. So these are the migrants that are actually coming in by the thousands to Costa Rica currently. They are fleeing economic disparity and violence from countries like Venezuela, or Nicaragua, or El Salvador, or Honduras. And if OECD predictions are correct, the number of migrants is only going to increase by 2030. And the complexity of the issues that force these migrants out of their countries will increase as well. Although Costa Rica has a fairly liberal migration policy, this is just too much to handle for a tiny little country of 5 million people. And so these challenges made it so that while I was an intern at the IOM this summer, the Costa Rican government approached IOM and said, we need help. We need a recommendation so that we can better manage this migration flow. And so I had the honor of actually researching and developing that recommendation so that we could present it to the government. And I wholeheartedly believe, based on everything that you've heard here tonight, that this solution really answers so many of the questions and challenges that we're going to face right now and in 2030 and beyond. So what is that solution? That solution proposes that we create a new migration category, or a visa, since that's what we call it in the US, that protects forced migrants that are not currently contemplated within the Refugee Convention. But also, and I love that this point was brought up earlier about really empowering migrants, that also provides them with a work permit so that they can take control of their lives. And so this is a very holistic approach for at least 5 reasons. First off, in terms of national security, it allows countries to know who's coming in and for what reasons. What better way to secure your borders instead of relegating these tasks to all of the organized criminal organization syndicates like smugglers. It also is an economically savvy investment, since OECD studies show time and time again that migrants are economic catalysts. They are job makers, and every country they're in, they're able to produce economic prosperity. Additionally, it's economically sustainable because the migrants won't be having to rely on government aid in order to have livelihoods. They'll be able to have their own jobs. It also calls to all of these human rights ideals that we should be harboring. And lastly, it provides a policy framework for countries who adopt it to be prepared for future mixed migration flows like this one that we're facing. For me, as a Costa Rican American, it's been an incredibly pride-filled and humbling experience to see that tiny country of ecotourism and coffee is really paving the way into migration and migration management for the future. And so tonight, I want to ask of all of you here to really look into the power of migration in all of your respective fields. Try to change that rhetoric of crisis to one of opportunity. And let's imagine a better future ahead. Let's look forward to 2030 and tap into the positive power of migration. Thank you.
Maria Nagel. Let's tap into the positive power of migration. You know, just a couple of hours ago, right before this event, all the speakers were rehearsing, and a couple of them like, well, we don't know, maybe we should have notes. Can I withdraw? You have 8 speakers already. I just know in a situation like this, it's like the day of the marathon, right? People fear public speaking. But on the day of the marathon, you can run further, you can run faster, because there's people around you, there's that energy around you and the passion for running the marathon or speaking about this topic. We're through, all 9 of you have given us some incredible perspectives on the possibilities of migration. Thank you very much. Yeah. Now, I know I mentioned questions, but we know you're busy. Time is of essence. So perhaps we can do the questions over some food and drink. But I will say just 1 minute, just a couple of thanks and closing remark. Thanks to, again, Tim Ouellette and team for coming and capturing this very important event for us with all your effort as you've done today. Thank you. Yeah. 2 more people. One person didn't get to thank enough, but I have seen firsthand her commitment behind the scenes to doing whatever it takes, staying up late at night, waking up in the morning, doing any task required. I've gotten a chance to know her over the past few years, previously doing a PhD here, now Professor Marina Treviakis. Thank you for all this effort, really. This whole thing throughout was just your passion for the years. And finally, we will close with just a few words from Professor Eileen Babbitt. You know, we had the first FIE. We're trying to get this going. We did it with the theme of media for social change. We had a few people in, but Eileen really saw the power of this event and has been such a supporter and just someone who epitomizes all that is good about Fletcher. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you, and let's end with just a few words that you'll share with us, Eileen. Yeah.
Thanks, Mahir. So I won't stand between you and refreshments. I just want to echo the thanks to these wonderful speakers. I hope if you weren't inspired when you came in tonight, you are now, and to go out and do whatever is necessary to make things work better in this world. I also want to thank Mihir and his team for the marvelous job they did in organizing this, coaching, putting it all together. Thank you so much. And just a word about our sponsor. I want to thank our wonderful program officer, Steve Del Rosso, who's here in the audience. Steve is a Fletcher graduate. Steve, stand up, please. Woo! So the grant that the Leir Institute has from the Carnegie Corporation has made these wonderful events possible, so thank you so much. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being such a terrific audience, and we will see you for refreshments out in the lobby. Thank you.
And vote.
And vote. They cut off my mic.
And voting is, remember the big day tomorrow for voting? And the bar is open.